to the Dream 100 Show, the epicenter of influence, collaboration, and exponential growth. You're about to discover the power of relationships. Dream 100 relationships. And you're one relationship away from a totally different business and life. This is your host, Michael Tesner.
Hey there, and welcome to this week's edition of the Dream 100 Show. I am absolutely thrilled. I have Brian Flowers with us, and he's got a business that a lot of people wouldn't believe it would lend itself to deploying a Dream 100 strategy. And Brian is in the death care space. Brian, thank you ever so much for coming on today. I look forward to a fun conversation.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
So I know that you've been in the death care space for quite some time. I would love just to kind of hear a little bit more about your story and then how that transpired to you opening up your own funeral business as well.
Oh, okay. So I've been in working in the field for about 16 years now, and almost 17. 18 years ago, I was working as a cabinet and furniture maker in a small custom high-end woodworking shop that specialized in local and sustainably harvested woods. And we were working on a pine kitchen going into this ridiculous 7,500 square foot mansion, but that's a different story. And the pantry at one stage of its construction, as it was sitting on its back on the shop workbench, looked like a plain pine casket. And the fellows that I worked for had looked at their business license early that week and noted that they were licensed as cabinet and casket makers, which is really a throwback to 150, 200 years ago. Oftentimes, the first undertakers in small communities were your local cabinet maker. So there was a historic precedence for this pivot. And they started wondering, what would it look like to make inexpensive plain pine caskets? We've all heard about price gouging in the funeral industry. And is there a market for this? And my former employer is an old family friend. And I called him up to pick his brain about price points, distribution, all of that sort of stuff. And he said, there is a casket maker that is about 50 miles from us that specializes in plain pine caskets. And economies of scale, I can probably get that box for about what you get your materials for. And he was familiar with the shop. And he said, if I could get a locally made, sustainably harvested solid wood casket, we could talk about green burial. And I said, what's that? And he gave me the nutshell definition: no embalming, 100% biodegradable container like a solid wood casket, and no outer burial container, no concrete vault. And it can be used as a vehicle for ecological restoration and landscape level conservation. And I was intrigued. And I went home and did a Google search. I blew out my 20-minute tolerance for staring at the screen if someone's not paying me, and fell down a rabbit hole. And this was really, green burial was very nascent in the country at that time. There were 3 cemeteries offering green burial and about 15 funeral homes that even knew it.
What year was this?
This would have been 2007.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is a while.
Yeah, 2006, maybe even. And I was intrigued in a way that really nothing had grabbed my attention like this before. I started boring the guys I worked with as I'd wax philosophic about the Cartesian mind-body duality, and nothing epitomizes our divorce from the natural world more than contemporary funeral practices. And they'd yell at me to shut up and go sand something. I was keeping tabs on this. John, my former employer who I'd talked to, he had shared some articles with me that he'd clipped about it. We had a few more conversations until about a year after that initial conversation, I called him up and said, hey, can we talk? And he said, yeah, come on out to the funeral home. And so I blew out all the sawdust with the air compressor and put on the button-down shirt and went to the funeral home to talk to the funeral home owner and said, look, I know you want green burial to happen. You've got a cemetery here. You've got a place to do that. But you're a business owner. You don't have time to do this. This is so new. It's not on your staff's radar, I don't imagine. If there's room on your team, bring me on and I will make this happen. And he said, let's find room. And
that's a crazy story.
Our career launched from there.
It's crazy because, I mean, to your point, green burial, I mean, even in the last couple of years is just starting to get talked about. And you were, I mean, in that industry and thinking about what you could do in that space, I mean, almost 20 years ago. That's crazy.
Yeah.
So fast forward to today, and I know that you've recently launched your business. How did you then kind of transition from kind of working for someone else to, hey, I want to have my own gig?
So it's something that had definitely been in the back of my head brewing for a number of years. And I'll skip over the details, but reached a crisis point with my former employer that was the impetus for doing this. I had been taking some of the initial steps, but I got to a point where I was looking at the fork in the road, and it was more frightening to stay on the current path I was than to make the leap and go into the unknown. And so I did. Yeah. I just couldn't work under the compromises I was working under anymore.
I don't know if I've heard it that way, but I've heard of the analogy, the fork in the road, but I've never heard someone say, looking at both ways. I mean, the one way was I couldn't continue to go down this particular path. So I knew the fork that I had to go. That's an interesting way to put it. I like it. So you decided that after being in the industry for quite some time, you're at that fork in the road with your employer, and great, now I want to do my own thing. How did you then, what were some of the first things that you did to launch the business and kind of start to move that needle?
Sure. So, I mean, really the first thing I started doing was gathering mentors to just talk this through. I had never run a business before. I had never been a business owner. Certainly I knew how to run a funeral home. I'd been involved in operations and managing operations for well over a decade. And most of my mentors tried to talk me out of it, I have to say. Starting a funeral home from scratch is not something people usually do. They buy an existing funeral home in large part because they run off of legacy. But I went ahead and defied those mentors and did it, and took a crash course in business accounting, business plan writing, and knocked out an 80-page business plan, started gathering investors and gathering capital. And then from there, it was pulling out all the stops, looking for locations, purchasing equipment, hiring a team, and putting together all of the elements that it takes to run a business and run a funeral home.
What does the competition locally look like? Across the U.S., there's a fair amount of funeral homes. Tell me a little bit more about what is the demographic of where you're located?
Mm-hmm.
How many funeral homes? Where are you starting to see kind of some of your unique niches in the marketplace? Would love to tell our listeners a little bit more about that, because you've got a really unique, the way that you're positioning yourself and your offerings are a bit unique.
They are, and that's really how we're differentiating ourselves in our local market. There are 9 funeral providers in our county, most of them local. There's one international corporate-owned provider that moved in about the same time Wildflower opened up. And they really differentiate between brick and mortar full-service funeral homes and low-cost discount providers operating out of a small storefront office without any place to do services on site. They might be outsourcing all of their preparation work to somebody else, that sort of thing. And I have no interest in being involved in that low-end discount space.
Didn't mean to interrupt you there. Just so our listeners understand, when you're saying kind of low cost, would that be somebody that walks in really small storefront and they're looking for, I want the cheapest casket and
probably not even a casket. They want the cheapest cremation, and
got it.
And which can be done for right around $1,000. And no services, and receiving their loved one back in maybe a cardboard or plastic box in 2 weeks. And there's some administrative burdens that are going to probably be put on the family as well. And it's really a race to the bottom, because all you have to stand on is price. And if you raise your price $10 above your competitor, your volume starts to drop off. And so I want to differentiate our place in the market by the things that we offer and level of service that we provide. We are the only provider that offers every form of disposition, which there are some new forms now in the marketplace. Traditionally, we've had cremation and burial. In Washington State, we've been at the forefront of this. We also have we were the first state to legalize a process called natural organic reduction, also branded as terramation, sometimes called human composting, that converts our bodies to soil in about 2 months. We also have a water-based process called aquamation that's very similar to cremation. And then, of course, green burial and traditional burial. So we can do it all, but we're really hanging our hat on the sustainable green offerings like natural organic reduction, aquamation, and green burial.
So when someone kind of walks in and for those of people that don't know the industry, there's a couple of different definitions. There's at need and there's pre-need. So pre-need, they're doing planning ahead of time and trying to get their arrangements done, whereas at need is someone just passed away and we need to move things along. So when the family comes in, are they then seeking out some of those unique offerings, or do you find yourself still having to kind of educate them on here are all the different options?
When they come in at need, they usually know what they're looking for their person. Rarely, sometimes we might be looking at 1 to 2 options. Commonly, we might be looking at natural organic reduction and or aquamation and weighing out those 2 options, but we're not starting from scratch with the entire waterfront. Pre-need, though, that is usually starts out as an education process of these are the entire array of options that you have, and this is what's involved with each one of them. These are the costs associated with them, and we'll often have a what I call a first touch meeting, which it's just information gathering. When it's pre-need, and we send them off with that information. They discuss it with their family, and then in 1 week to a couple of months, they come back in and we finalize those arrangements.
Got it. If I kind of make a slight pivot as we're talking about strategic partnerships, strategic alliances. So it sounds like you've built some good relationships within the industry, some good mentors to kind of help you. And obviously you were in the industry for quite a while as well. When you look at other ways to get the at-need or the pre-need business, and in this case, we'll focus more on pre-need so that people can do the planning. And to your point, they have some time to look at all the different options because they're not in shock. They were able to kind of plan it and really have it be a little bit more of a non-rush process. How would you approach kind of this framework of the Dream 100? So starting to build relationships with, for example, churches or other cemeteries or other places that hospice that could potentially have a relationship with you and Wildflower. And how have you started to find some of those people? Have you had success? Give me some more details there, because your listeners would be interested to see how something like this can actually apply in an industry where you might not think that you could deploy the Dream 100 framework.
And you absolutely can. And in fact, I think it's essential. And I think successful funeral providers do deploy that framework without realizing that's what they're doing, without calling it the Dream 100, and with some adjustments as well. And relationships, especially in a small community like Whatcom County, where I live in the very northwest corner of Washington State, funeral home runs on relationships. And that's relationships with families that I've served over the years. I've made thousands of funeral arrangements over the last 16, 17 years, and cultivating those relationships, making sure that those families received amazing service so that when I cross paths with them in the grocery store or at the local dog park, it's a good interaction and they remember me and they want to come back and get that same level of service next time. And that's more outside the Dream 100 framework. Inside that framework is, you hit on it, relationships with churches, relationships with estate planning attorneys and financial advisors, because those are who folks are working with, particularly attorneys and financial planners, as they're starting to put together those final wishes. They're putting together their will, their advance directives, maybe a post form if they have an illness. And it's a real logical step from there to put together their final wishes with the funeral home. And if you have that good relationship with those folks whose office they're in, and they say, okay, here's Brian's card. This is your next step to call him. I've worked with him before. I trust him. You're not going to get sales pressure. He is an honest guy. Then you've got a trusted referral, which is invaluable. And then churches are great relationships. I've one example. So just to take a step back, Michael, I also have a long career behind me as a professional performing storyteller, which is a great vehicle for me to get in front of all kinds of people. And I have relationships with a couple of churches, and I've been really working closely with local Unity Church, Unity Spiritual Center, and using storytelling as a way to provide them value. We did this last summer a personal storytelling workshop with about 25 congregants to look at how you find the stories in your life and develop those into a 5 to 15 minute performance piece that culminated in a performance done by the congregants. It was about a 6-hour workshop. And with that, I am invited as well to speak to the congregants as part of a sermon about what Wildflower offers. And we don't do this in any way that's salesy. There's no come on, there's no pressure. There's just information. And I've found over the years, when you can present that kind of information without any sales pitch to it, people are a lot more open to digesting it and following up with you because you haven't put them off with that sales pitch. And that holds true. I regularly do educational presentations for our local hospice organization as well, which leads to wonderful referrals as well.
I love what you said there. And I want to hit on the point of, so if we look at the churches, your way into the church was leveraging some of your unique skill sets of storytelling, but I'm sure that you didn't obviously charge the church anything for that workshop.
Sure.
So it was just your way of, let me give some value first. And I think that's where a lot of people, they start to go astray, is that they get so hung up in, well, I mean, I'm willing to do that, but I mean, what am I going to get out of this? And instead you played more of the long game of, let me do this workshop, let me add some value. And then it's a lot easier for you to either come in with an ask or be casual and say, hey, would you mind if I did a short sermon about the death care space and some of our offerings, but I'm going to do it in a way that there'll be zero sales pitch. But because you put in the work and you delivered value first before asking for anything, you were able to really build that relationship.
Yeah. And oftentimes I don't even have to ask. I just get invited.
That's the beautiful thing is that as other churches or other organizations see, hey, these are the great things that Brian had done. And he did this workshop and this presentation, that you then start having people approaching you. Is there any special way that you then manage some of those relationships? Like, do you have, so let's just say, a pastor at a church, the directors at the local hospice and some of these other places, you start to kind of build your Rolodex, so to speak. Is there anything that you like to do to kind of keep those relationships fresh and moving, whether it's you going out to lunch or coffee or sending handwritten letters or emails or calls, or how do you kind of continue to be, I guess, the go-to funeral home and the go-to guy in the neighborhood once you've got those relationships?
And, of course, it is going to vary with every relationship. With to go back to this particular church, the Unity Church, they recently had a fundraising auction, and I volunteered a private storytelling performance to be an item that's up for bid. And so that just keeps my face there and keeps me involved with that community in a way that is providing value and really doesn't have anything to do with death care, but it's still me, and I'm so closely associated with Wildflower. There is a clergy member that I've become very good friends with, and I have been able to serve their congregation for a number of years now and make sure that they get the absolute best service. And there's some very unique cultural and spiritual needs that they have in those sacred final rites. And we make sure that we are the absolute best provider in our community to meet those needs. And then regularly get together with the clergy, every couple of months. Hey, it's been a little while. Let's go get a drink. And then, at the end of the round or two, it's always a race to see who pulls the card out first.
Well, I think, sorry, please go ahead.
Well, and then it's a whole different relationship when you're looking at working with attorneys and financial advisors, because in the Dream 100 structure, you would be providing kickbacks, gifts, incentives. You absolutely cannot in that arena, especially in the case of financial advisors, that's illegal. And so looking to provide other means of value for them. And I have developed a funeral pre-planning packet, which a lot of funeral homes pre-planning packets come from a third party that they work with that is trying to really design it's a sales pitch, and it's a transparent sales pitch. And so I've designed a pre-planning packet that is information and that has real value. It's a place to record wishes, a place to record information that's needed to complete death certificates, and goes into some of the legal ramifications of what we do. And I am working to get that into the hands of more and more estate planning attorneys and financial advisors, because it's a tool for them to expand the services that they provide their clients. And it's subtly branded as a Wildflower document.
I like it. And I think, and you said it a little bit earlier in our conversation, but at the end of the day, once you've kind of got the relationships, you're continuing to nurture them. But the best way that you can nurture them without you having to nurture them is by making sure that the families that they're referring are being well taken care of, because then they're going to go back and the family, oh, thank you ever so much for referring us to Brian. And he took great care of our family and all of our wishes. And you're then continuing to stay top of mind with that advisor or that accountant, for example, without you having to be on the horn with them every single week, for example.
And there is a reciprocal relationship, particularly with a few of the attorneys that I'm close with, who I know have a very similar value set as mine, that I will refer families to, because I'm often, as I'm sitting down with folks making arrangements, and their person has just died and they're a C right now. I don't know if we have a will or we do have a will, but the attorney that wrote the will retired 10 years ago. We don't know what to do with that. Well, let me give you a referral to a estate planning attorney, a probate attorney that can walk you through this and do it with care and quality. And so they get referrals from me in turn. But I can't do that with every single attorney that I'm hoping to get my documents in the hands of.
No, definitely. No, it makes sense that once you're also getting kind of referrals, be able to refer some people back in as well. Mm-hmm. But I like it. I know that you mentioned a little bit earlier of finding mentors and kind of doing a deep dive into different types of business. So is there a book or a podcast or a course or something that you're like, hey, I really loved this if I were to recommend it to our listeners?
Books wise, for me, it's really the basic kind of MBA between two covers kind of books. The Entrepreneurial Problem. Is that the name of the book?
You're probably thinking of The E-Myth?
The E-Myth. Yes. Thank you. That was an excellent read for me. And it was really valuable as I was building the business, because I was able to start building into the structure of this business the means to pull myself back from it. But for me, I'm such a person-to-person connector that I best advise, the best mentorships are human connections with people whose experience and knowledge can learn from and value, and who I can return to. I have become a dear friend. He is the partner that we work with. He's the owner and CEO of the natural organic reduction facility that we work with. And he comes from the world of finance and has only been in the funeral care space for probably 4 years now. And the man is a brilliant entrepreneur and a brilliant business owner. And I have so much to learn from him. And at the same time, I have so much to teach him about funeral care. So it's a wonderful reciprocal relationship that is mutually beneficial and deeply satisfying.
I love it. Well, I always like to save this question for last. I'm confident you have a good answer based on the industry that you work in. But if you were looking back, how do you personally, not necessarily just your business, but how do you personally want to be remembered during this lifetime?
Oh, I mean, the words that I live by are integrity, honesty, compassion, care, transparency. So I want to be remembered as a contributing community member who has given value to individuals and groups in my area in which I reside, and is remembered as someone who has lived a life of integrity and approached everyone with compassion and love.
I like it. Where can our listeners go to learn more about your funeral home? wildflowerfuneralconcepts.com. We've got a new website that is about to launch in a couple of weeks that is going to be absolutely gorgeous and filled with all kinds of information. There's all great information there now that none of the information's changing. You can learn about all the dispositions that we offer. You can learn about our staff. You can learn about our values and how we contribute to our community. Brian, thank you ever so much for coming on. Hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Michael. This has been a pleasure.
Michael Tasner signing off. Good morning, good afternoon, and good night.